Everyone laughed at the little girl, not knowing she was an heiress. Then the little boy made a call. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type "love" in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Westfield Elementary as 7-year-old Charlotte Wilson navigated the crowded hallway on her small metal crutches. Her blonde hair caught the fluorescent light as she moved carefully between clusters of chattering children, each step requiring concentration and balance that other kids took for granted. The rubber tips of her crutches squeaked softly against the polished linoleum floor, a sound that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Charlotte had learned to tune out most of the whispers and stares that followed her daily journey through the school corridors. She focused instead on the small victories, making it to class on time, completing her assignments with the neat handwriting her grandmother praised, and occasionally catching a glimpse of genuine kindness from a classmate who saw past her disability. "Watch out, everyone, the robot's coming through," shouted Marcus Chen, a stocky fifth grader whose favorite pastime seemed to be making other children miserable. His voice carried across the hallway, causing heads to turn and snickers to ripple through the crowd of students. Charlotte's cheeks burned with familiar shame, but she kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. Grandmother Ruth had taught her that responding to bullies only encouraged them, though sometimes Charlotte wondered if ignoring them was really working. The taunts seemed to get worse each week, and Marcus was becoming bolder in his cruelty. She had been born with spina bifida, a condition that left her legs weak and underdeveloped, requiring the assistance of crutches to walk. The doctors had explained to her grandmother that Charlotte was actually quite fortunate. Many children with her condition never walked at all, but at 7 years old, Charlotte didn't feel fortunate. She felt different, isolated, and increasingly aware of how much her daily struggles set her apart from her peers. Despite her physical challenges, Charlotte possessed a brilliant mind that absorbed information like a sponge. She consistently scored at the top of her class in reading and mathematics, often finishing her work so quickly that Mrs. Patterson would give her extra books to read quietly at her desk. Charlotte loved losing herself in stories about brave children who overcame impossible odds, though she sometimes wondered if such courage existed in real life. From across the hallway, 6-year-old Benjamin Torres watched the scene unfold with growing indignation. His sandy blonde hair fell across his forehead as he clenched his small fists, feeling a surge of protective anger that seemed too big for his small body. Ben spent his afternoons at Westfield Elementary not as a student. He attended kindergarten at the smaller Roosevelt Elementary across town, but because his mother, Maria Torres, worked as a janitor there. Ben had been observing Charlotte for weeks now, noticing how she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the constant harassment. He admired her resilience and was disturbed by the casual cruelty of children who seemed to find entertainment in her struggles. His mother had raised him to believe that protecting those who couldn't protect themselves was one of life's most important responsibilities. "Hey, Marcus," called out Jessica Walsh, a girl from Charlotte's class who usually stayed neutral in conflicts. "Maybe you should worry about your own problems instead of bothering Charlotte. I heard your dad lost his job again." Marcus's face darkened with embarrassment and rage. Being challenged publicly, especially by a girl, was more than his fragile ego could handle. He turned his attention back to Charlotte with renewed viciousness. "At least I have a dad," Marcus snarled, moving closer to Charlotte. "What happened to yours? Did he take one look at his freak daughter and run away?" The words hit Charlotte like physical blows. She had always been sensitive about her family situation, knowing only that her parents had died when she was a baby, and that her elderly grandmother struggled to provide for them both. The other children had loving families who picked them up in nice cars and took them on vacations. Charlotte had grandmother Ruth, who loved her fiercely but was 73 years old and worked part-time at a small flower shop just to pay rent on their tiny apartment. "That's enough," Ben's young voice cut through the gathering crowd like a knife. Despite being younger and smaller than most of the children watching, his determination was unmistakable. He stepped forward, positioning himself squarely between Marcus and Charlotte, his chin raised defiantly. Marcus sneered down at the kindergartner who dared to challenge him. Well, what do we have here?" The janitor's kid thinks he's a hero. What are you gonna do about it, trash boy? Your mom cleans our toilets and picks up our garbage. The insult about his mother hit Ben harder than any physical blow could have. Maria Torres was his hero, a woman who had immigrated to America with nothing but hope and determination, who worked multiple jobs to provide for her son, who taught him English and Spanish with equal pride, who kissed his scraped knees and helped him with homework even when she was exhausted from 12-hour workdays. My mama is worth 100 of you, Ben shot back, his voice steady despite the tremor of emotion. And Charlotte is smarter and braver than any of us. You're just jealous because you're too stupid to see how amazing she is. The crowd of children fell silent, shocked by the intensity of Ben's defense. Even Charlotte looked up at him with surprise and something that might have been hope flickering in her bright green eyes. Marcus, faced with unexpected resistance and feeling humiliated in front of his peers, decided to escalate the situation. You want to be the cripple's boyfriend? Fine. Let's see how you like being as pathetic as she is. With deliberate malice, Marcus stepped forward and shoved Ben hard in the chest. Ben stumbled backward, bumping into Charlotte, who lost her careful balance and fell to the floor with a crash. Her crutches clattered away from her, sliding across the polished linoleum as she landed awkwardly on her side. The hallway erupted in laughter from some children, gasps from others, and a few scattered calls for someone to get a teacher. Charlotte lay on the floor, her face burning with humiliation as she struggled to sit up. Her school books had scattered everywhere, and her carefully braided hair had come partially undone. Ben was on his knees beside her immediately, his face flushed with anger and concern. Are you hurt? Did you hit your head? Charlotte shook her head, though tears were starting to gather in her eyes. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional agony of being helpless on the floor while dozens of children stared down at her. This was her worst nightmare, realized, being completely vulnerable and dependent while everyone watched. I'm okay, she whispered, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Ben carefully helped Charlotte sit up and began gathering her scattered belongings. Marcus stood over them, grinning with satisfaction at the chaos he had created. Other children began to drift away, the excitement over, leaving Charlotte and Ben alone in the aftermath. Can't even stand up by yourself, Marcus taunted. What a loser. Come on, guys, let's get away from the freaks before whatever they have is contagious. As Marcus and his followers sauntered away, Ben gently retrieved Charlotte's crutches and positioned them within her reach. His small hands were shaking with suppressed fury, but his voice was gentle when he spoke to her. Here, let me help you up, he offered, extending his hand. Charlotte hesitated. She had learned to be independent out of necessity, and accepting help often felt like admitting weakness. But something in Ben's kind eyes told her that his offer came from genuine caring rather than pity. Together, they managed to get Charlotte back on her feet. Ben picked up her backpack and the last of her scattered papers, making sure everything was accounted for. As they stood together in the now empty hallway, Charlotte felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, the warmth of true friendship. Thank you, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. You didn't have to do that. Now Marcus is going to be mean to you too. Ben shrugged with the fearless honesty of childhood. My mama says good people help when they can, no matter what it costs them. Besides, you're worth standing up for. What neither child knew was that this moment of connection, born from cruelty but nurtured by kindness, would set in motion events that would change their lives forever. Across town, in a glass tower overlooking the bustling city, CEO William Harrison was about to receive the most shocking phone call of his existence. A call that would shatter everything he believed about his past and transform his understanding of what family really meant. Unknown to them all, the principal's emergency contact list contained a number that would bridge two broken hearts across 7 years of painful separation. William Harrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor of Harrison Tower, watching the city spread out below him like a living map of ambition and possibility. At 35, he commanded a business empire worth over $800 million, built from the ground up through relentless determination and an almost superhuman capacity for work that had consumed his life for the past 7 years. The office itself was a testament to success. Mahogany furniture imported from Italy, Persian rugs worth more than most people's annual salaries, and walls lined with awards, photographs with politicians and celebrities, and framed newspaper articles chronicling his rise from grief-stricken young man to business mogul. Yet despite all the trappings of achievement, William felt an emptiness that no amount of money or recognition could fill. His assistant, Janet Chen, knocked softly before entering with his afternoon coffee served in bone china that had belonged to his grandmother. Janet had worked for William for 5 years and had learned to read his moods with uncanny accuracy. Today she noticed the familiar tension in his shoulders that appeared whenever the quarterly charity events approached. "Mr. Harrison, the Yamamoto deal papers are ready for your signature," she said efficiently, placing the documents on his leather-bound desk blotter. "The contracts include the environmental impact clauses you requested, and legal has approved all the warranty specifications. Also, the Children's Hope Foundation called again about your keynote speech for Saturday's gala. They need the final text by tomorrow morning for the program printing." William nodded absently, his attention still focused on the world beyond his window. The charity gala was particularly difficult for him. It raised money for children with disabilities, a cause that had become central to his philanthropic efforts for reasons he kept locked away in the deepest chambers of his heart. 7 years ago, his life had been entirely different. He had been engaged to Sarah Mitchell, a pediatric nurse who specialized in working with special needs children at Children's Memorial Hospital. Sarah had possessed a rare combination of medical expertise and genuine compassion that made her beloved by patients, families, and colleagues alike. She could calm a terrified child with a smile, explain complex medical procedures in terms that young minds could understand, and somehow find hope in even the most challenging situations. Their relationship had been a fairy tale of mutual respect, shared values, and deep love that seemed destined to last forever. William had been building his first company then, a small real estate development firm that showed promise but was still years away from the empire it would become. Sarah supported his ambitions while pursuing her own career goals, and together they planned a future filled with children, travel, and the kind of happiness that most people only dream about. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday night in November. Sarah, 7 months pregnant with their daughter, had been driving home from a late shift at the hospital when an intoxicated driver ran a red light and slammed into her car at 60 miles per hour. The impact was devastating, crushing the driver's side of her small sedan and causing injuries that the emergency medical team described as unsurvivable. William had been working late at his office when the hospital called. He could still remember every detail of that phone conversation. The nurse's careful professional tone as she explained that Sarah had been brought in after a severe motor vehicle accident. The sound of medical equipment beeping in the background. The way his hands shook so violently that he could barely hold the phone. By the time he reached the hospital, Sarah was gone. The doctors explained that they had done everything possible, but her injuries were too severe. They told him with practiced sympathy that Sarah had died from massive internal trauma, and that the unborn baby had not survived the accident. In his overwhelming grief, William accepted their assessment without question, trusting completely in their medical expertise while drowning in his own sorrow. What William didn't know was that in the chaos of that tragic night, his daughter had actually survived. Charlotte Elizabeth had been born via emergency cesarean section at 33 weeks, critically injured but alive. Due to a series of miscommunications and the overwhelming trauma caseload that night, she had been registered in the NICU under her mother's maiden name of Mitchell rather than as Harrison. The hospital staff, dealing with multiple casualties and working under extreme pressure, had not connected the surviving infant to the grieving man who left believing his entire family was gone. 3 days later, when Ruth Wilson, Sarah's maternal grandmother, came to the hospital to arrange funeral services, a nurse mentioned that Sarah's baby had actually survived and was fighting for her life in the neonatal intensive care unit. Ruth was stunned to discover her great-granddaughter alive, but by then William had retreated into isolation, unreachable in his grief and making funeral arrangements through intermediaries. Ruth made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. Terrified that a wealthy, successful man would take the baby away from her, the only family member left who had known and loved Sarah, she chose to let William continue believing the child had died. She completed the legal paperwork to become Charlotte's guardian, using her own limited resources to care for the premature infant, who would grow up never knowing her father was alive and grieving for her. The grief had nearly destroyed William. For months he existed in a haze of pain and guilt, wondering if he could have prevented the tragedy somehow, if he should have insisted Sarah take time off work earlier in her pregnancy, if he should have picked her up that night instead of letting her drive herself home. Friends and family tried to help, but their well-meaning words felt hollow against the magnitude of his loss. Instead of succumbing to despair, William eventually channeled his pain into an almost manic focus on building his business. Work became his salvation in his prison, a way to occupy every waking moment so that he didn't have time to think about what he had lost. He threw himself into real estate deals, technology investments, and corporate acquisitions with a ruthlessness that impressed competitors and worried those who cared about him. Harrison Industries grew exponentially, fueled by William's relentless drive and his uncanny ability to spot opportunities that others missed. Within 3 years, he had expanded from local real estate into national development projects. Within 5 years, he was investing in cutting-edge technology companies and green energy initiatives. By the 7-year mark, he commanded a diversified empire that touched everything from sustainable housing to medical research. Success, however, felt hollow without someone to share it with. William dated occasionally. His wealth and status made him attractive to many women, but he never allowed anyone to get close enough to matter. His heart remained locked away with the memories of Sarah and the daughter he would never know, preserved like artifacts in a museum that he visited in his darkest moments. The Children's Hope Foundation had become his primary charitable focus, a way to honor Sarah's memory and perhaps find some meaning in his loss. He donated millions annually to support children with disabilities, funded research into spina bifida and other congenital conditions, and spoke at events where his presence alone could raise hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet every speech, every check he wrote, every photograph with grateful families reminded him of the child he had lost. Meanwhile, 12 miles away at Westfield Elementary, Ben Torres sat in the hallway outside Mrs. Patterson's classroom, working on his kindergarten homework, while his mother cleaned the school. Maria Torres moved methodically through her tasks, emptying wastebaskets, wiping down desks, mopping floors, with the quiet efficiency of someone who took pride in her work, despite its humble nature. Ben often spent these after-school hours observing the dynamics of the elementary school environment. He had become fascinated by the complex social hierarchies that existed among children, the way some kids seemed naturally confident while others struggled to find their place. Most of all, he had become increasingly concerned about Charlotte Wilson, the blonde girl with crutches who faced daily harassment from older students. Ben's own experiences had taught him to recognize injustice and stand against it. His mother had immigrated from a small village in Jalisco, Mexico, when she was 18 years old, pregnant and alone after Ben's father abandoned them upon learning about the pregnancy. Maria spoke very little English when she arrived in America, but she was determined to build a better life for her unborn child. The early years had been incredibly difficult. Maria worked multiple minimum-wage jobs, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at grocery stores, doing laundry for wealthier families, all while learning English and raising Ben as a single mother. They lived in a series of small, cramped apartments in neighborhoods where gunshots were more common than children's laughter. Despite their financial struggles, Maria ensured that Ben understood the value of education, kindness, and hard work. She read to him every night in both Spanish and English, helped him with homework even when she was exhausted from 14-hour workdays, and taught him that a person's worth was measured not by their possessions, but by their character and their willingness to help others. Ben had inherited his mother's compassion and her fierce sense of justice. When he saw Charlotte being mistreated, it awakened something protective in his young heart that demanded action. He had been watching her for weeks, noticing how she arrived at school each morning with carefully braided hair and clothes that were clean but obviously worn, how she ate her modest lunch slowly to make it last, how she helped other children with their studies even when they had been unkind to her. Today, as Maria cleaned the principal's office, Ben found himself thinking about Charlotte's situation with unusual intensity. The incident in the hallway had shown him just how cruel children could be, and how powerless he felt to protect someone he had come to care about deeply. Mijo, stay close while I finish the classrooms, Maria called to Ben in her accented English. She had been working at Westfield Elementary for 2 years now, and the teachers had grown fond of her quiet efficiency and her polite, well-behaved son, who never caused trouble during his after-school visits. As Ben sat cross-legged on the floor practicing his letters, he overheard a conversation between 2 teachers that made his ears perk up with interest. Mrs. Patterson and Miss Rodriguez were discussing Charlotte's academic performance and home situation with the careful discretion that educators used when sharing sensitive information. "That Wilson girl continues to amaze me," Mrs. Patterson was saying as she gathered papers from her desk. "Her reading comprehension scores are off the charts, and her mathematical reasoning is at least 2 grade levels above her peers. It's remarkable, really, considering everything she's dealing with at home." Miss Rodriguez, the school's reading specialist, nodded thoughtfully. The grandmother mentioned that Charlotte's birth father is actually alive, though he doesn't know about her. Some kind of miscommunication at the hospital when Charlotte was born. Mrs. Wilson has been too afraid to contact him. Apparently, he's some wealthy businessman who was told the baby died in the same accident that killed Charlotte's mother. Ben's young mind absorbed this information with growing excitement rather than concern. He had known that Charlotte lived with her grandmother, but he hadn't realized that her father might be alive and unaware of her existence. "The grandmother keeps his business card in her wallet," Mrs. Patterson continued. "She showed it to me once when we were discussing Charlotte's medical expenses. William Harrison from Harrison Industries, you know, the company that donated our new computer lab. Mrs. Wilson says she's been wanting to contact him for years, but doesn't know how to explain why she never told him Charlotte survived." The conversation painted a picture that suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than desperation. Ben had heard his mother and other adults talking about William Harrison, praising his company's donations to local schools and his support for children's charities. If Charlotte's father was not only alive but also someone who helped children in need, then maybe there was a way to bring them together. As the teachers continued their discussion, Ben made a decision that would change everything. He had heard adults talking about how important it was to tell the truth and reunite families. If Charlotte's father was alive and would want to know about her, then Ben needed to find a way to contact him. After his mother finished cleaning the principal's office, Ben volunteered to help carry supplies to the storage room. While Maria was organizing cleaning materials, Ben quickly memorized the phone number from the emergency contact sheet posted by the principal's desk, a list that included William Harrison as a major donor who could be reached in case of emergencies involving school funding or serious incidents. That evening, at home in their small apartment, Ben waited until his mother was busy preparing dinner before using her cell phone to call the number. His hands trembled as he dialed, knowing that he was about to change Charlotte's life forever. Ben's small fingers dialed the number with the careful precision of a child who understood the magnitude of what he was attempting. The phone began ringing in that glass tower across town, where William Harrison was reviewing quarterly reports and trying to push away the melancholy that always accompanied thoughts of the upcoming charity gala. William glanced at his phone with mild irritation. The caller ID showed a local number he didn't recognize, and his first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. Unknown numbers usually meant solicitors, disgruntled business partners, or journalists seeking quotes about his latest acquisition. But something, perhaps the same inexplicable force that had brought Charlotte and Ben together in that hallway, compelled him to answer. "William Harrison speaking," he said in his characteristic businesslike tone, the voice that had negotiated billion-dollar deals and commanded respect in boardrooms across the country. There was a pause on the other end, filled with the ambient sounds of a modest home, the distant hum of a television, the sizzle of something cooking on a stove, the soft murmur of Spanish being spoken in the background. Then a small, uncertain voice spoke, carrying with it an innocence that cut through William's professional defenses like a knife through silk. Hello? Is this Mr. Harrison who helps kids at schools?" William's eyebrows furrowed in surprise. This was definitely not a typical business call, nor was it the kind of prank call that occasionally reached his private line. The voice belonged to a child, very young from the sound of it, and there was something in its tone that suggested genuine need rather than mischief. "I'm sorry, who is this?" William asked, his tone softening slightly. How did you get this number? The child took a deep breath, and William could hear the nervous determination in the pause that followed. When the boy spoke again, his words came in a rush, as if he were afraid of losing his courage. My name is Ben, the young voice continued with growing confidence. I'm calling about Charlotte Wilson. She goes to Westfield Elementary, and I heard teachers talking about how her daddy is alive but doesn't know about her. I got your number from the school's emergency list because my mama cleans there, and I heard you help children. A chill ran down William's spine at the mention of the name Charlotte. It was not a particularly uncommon name, but it carried profound significance in his carefully compartmentalized emotional world. Charlotte was the name he and Sarah had chosen for their daughter during those blissful months when they planned their future together. But it was Ben's next words that truly shattered William's carefully maintained emotional walls. Charlotte Elizabeth Wilson, Ben continued, his young voice filled with the seriousness of someone delivering important information. She was born on October 28th, and she's 7 years old now. She has blonde hair and green eyes just like her mama did, and she uses crutches because she has something wrong with her legs. But she's really, really smart, and she's super kind to everyone even when they're mean to her. The phone nearly slipped from William's grasp as the full impact of Ben's words hit him. His mind raced backward through 7 years of carefully constructed grief, returning to that horrible night in the hospital when his world had collapsed. Charlotte Elizabeth, born on October 28th, the exact name and date he and Sarah had chosen and anticipated. Ben, William said, his voice barely above a whisper, tell me about Charlotte's mother. What do you know about what happened to her? Her mama's name was Sarah, and she was a nurse who helped sick kids, Ben replied immediately. She died in a car accident when Charlotte was born. But Charlotte survived even though the doctors thought she wouldn't. Her great-grandmother Ruth has been taking care of her, but she's really old and doesn't have much money, and Charlotte needs expensive medicine and therapy for her legs. The confirmation was overwhelming. William felt the room spinning around him as 7 years of grief and loss suddenly transformed into the most profound possibility he had ever encountered. This wasn't just coincidence. The name, the date, the circumstances, even Sarah's profession all aligned perfectly with the tragedy that had defined his adult life. Ben, William managed to say, his voice shaking with barely controlled emotion, why are you calling me? How did you know to contact me specifically? Because Charlotte's grandma has your business card, Ben explained with the simple logic of childhood. She told teachers that she's been scared to call you because she didn't know how to explain why she never told you Charlotte was alive. But Charlotte gets picked on at school every day, and she worries about money for her medicine, and she doesn't have anyone to protect her except her old grandma. I thought if you knew about her, you would want to help. William was already reaching for his car keys with his free hand, his heart pounding with a mixture of joy, rage, and desperate urgency. If Ben was right, if Charlotte Wilson was indeed his daughter, then she had been living in poverty and facing daily cruelty while he possessed the resources to give her everything she needed. Ben, this is incredibly important, William said, his voice intense with urgency. Where are you calling from? Can you tell me exactly where Charlotte lives? I'm at home, but I know Charlotte lives in the Maple Grove apartments on the east side, Ben replied. Her grandma Ruth works at Peterson's flower shop downtown, and Charlotte usually stays at school until really late because her grandma has to take 2 buses to pick her up. William was already in the elevator, descending toward the parking garage as he spoke. Ben, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you've told me might be the most important information anyone has ever given me. I'm going to drive to the flower shop right now to talk to Charlotte's grandmother. Can you call the school and ask them to make sure Charlotte stays there until I can arrange to pick her up? I can try, Ben said, though his young voice carried a note of uncertainty about his ability to influence adult decisions. But Mr. Harrison, are you really Charlotte's daddy? Are you going to be able to help her? Ben, William said as his Mercedes roared to life in the parking garage, if Charlotte is who I think she is, then I've been missing her for her entire life without knowing she was alive. And yes, I'm going to help her in every way possible. You may have just reunited a father with his daughter. As William raced through the city streets toward Peterson's flower shop, His mind was reeling with the implications of what he had just learned. For 7 years, he had lived with the guilt and sorrow of losing both Sarah and their unborn child. For 7 years, he had built an empire while carrying the weight of insurmountable loss. For 7 years, he had believed himself to be completely alone in the world. Now navigating through late afternoon traffic with tears streaming down his face, William Harrison faced the most earth-shattering possibility of his adult life. His daughter might be alive, brilliant, and beautiful, but struggling with challenges that his wealth and influence could easily address. The cruel irony was almost too much to bear. While he had been mourning a child he thought was dead, she had been growing up in poverty, facing daily harassment, and worrying about her elderly guardian's ability to provide for her basic needs. 7 years of her childhood had been unnecessarily difficult because of Ruth Wilson's decision to keep them apart, a choice born of fear and misunderstanding that had cost them both precious time together. Peterson's flower shop occupied a narrow storefront in the older part of downtown, wedged between a laundromat and a small grocery store that served the city's growing Hispanic population. William pulled up outside and sat in his car for a moment, trying to steady his breathing and prepare himself for what might be the most important conversation of his life. Through the shop's windows, he could see an elderly woman with silver hair carefully arranging chrysanthemums in a large vase. Ruth Wilson looked exactly as he remembered her from his brief meetings with her during his relationship with Sarah. Kind eyes, gentle hands, and the careful movements of someone whose arthritis made every task more difficult than it should be. William entered the shop, causing a small bell to chime softly above the door. Ruth looked up from her work, and her face went completely white with shock as she recognized the man she thought she would never see again. "Oh my God," Ruth whispered, her hands trembling as she set down the flowers. "William? William Harrison? How did you find me?" The reaction confirmed everything William needed to know. Ruth's obvious recognition, her shock at seeing him, the guilty panic in her expression all told the story of a woman who had been carrying a terrible secret for 7 years. "Ruth," William said, his voice filled with a mixture of joy and anger that he struggled to control. "A little boy named Ben Torres called me this afternoon. He told me about Charlotte. He told me about my daughter who I've spent 7 years believing was dead." Ruth Wilson's legs gave out, and she collapsed into the chair behind the counter as 7 years of guilt and fear finally caught up with her. "William, I can explain," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting her. When I found out you were told she had died, I was so afraid you would take her away from me. She was all I had left of Sarah." "Where is she?" William demanded, his voice gaining strength and authority. "Where is Charlotte right now?" "She's at school," Ruth replied, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I was just about to close the shop and take the bus to pick her up. William, please, I know what I did was wrong, but I love that little girl more than my own life. I've done my best to take care of her even though we don't have much money." William's anger began to temper as he saw the genuine anguish in Ruth's eyes and understood the impossible situation she had faced 7 years ago. But his priority now was meeting his daughter, not sorting through the complex emotions surrounding Ruth's deception. "We're going to get Charlotte together," William said firmly. "And then you're going to tell both of us exactly what happened and why you made the choices you made. But first, I need to see my daughter." Ruth nodded, wiping her eyes as she gathered her coat and purse. "She's the most wonderful child, William. She's smart and kind and brave, just like Sarah was. She's going to be so confused about all this, but she's always wondered about her father." As they drove toward Westfield Elementary in William's Mercedes, Ruth began to tell the story that she had kept locked in her heart for 7 years. The miscommunication at the hospital, her discovery of Charlotte's survival, her fear of losing the only family she had left, it all poured out in a rush of words and tears that painted a picture of love and terror and impossible choices. "I know you'll never forgive me," Ruth concluded as they pulled into the school parking lot. "But I want you to know that every day I've wondered if I made the right choice. I've watched Charlotte struggle with things that you could have easily provided for her, and I felt guilty about keeping you apart. But I was so afraid of losing her." William turned off the engine and looked at the elderly woman who had raised his daughter. His anger was still there, but it was overwhelmed by his desperate need to finally hold the child he had mourned for 7 years. "Ruth," he said quietly, "we'll figure out how to deal with what happened later. Right now, I just want to meet my daughter." Together, they walked toward the school entrance, both of them trembling with anticipation and fear. Inside, Charlotte Wilson was working on her homework in the main office, unaware that her entire world was about to change. She had no idea that the father she had never known was about to walk through those doors, or that the cruel day that had started with Marcus Chen's harassment was about to transform into the most miraculous reunion of her young life. The abandoned phone call that had started this extraordinary day was about to bridge 7 years of separation and create a family that had been torn apart by tragedy and kept apart by fear, but was finally ready to be healed by love, forgiveness, and the courage of a 6-year-old boy who believed that every child deserved to know their father's love. The main office of Westfield Elementary felt smaller than usual as William Harrison and Ruth Wilson entered together, their footsteps echoing softly on the polished linoleum floor. Through the reception area's glass partition, William could see a small blonde figure bent over a workbook, her metal crutches leaning against the chair beside her. Even from behind, even without seeing her face, William felt a jolt of recognition that went beyond physical appearance. Charlotte looked up at the sound of approaching footsteps, and William's world stopped completely. The green eyes that met his were unmistakably Sarah's eyes, not just the color but the depth, the intelligence, the kindness that seemed to radiate from within. The shape of her face, the curve of her smile, the way she tilted her head slightly when curious were all hauntingly familiar, like looking at a living photograph of the woman he had loved and lost. "Grandma Ruth?" Charlotte said, confusion evident in her voice as she noticed the well-dressed stranger accompanying her grandmother. "You're early. And who is this man?" Ruth's hands were trembling as she approached her great-granddaughter. 7 years of secrecy were about to end, and she wasn't sure how to begin explaining the magnitude of what was happening. "Charlotte, sweetheart," Ruth said gently, her voice thick with emotion. "This is someone very important who's come to meet you. This is your father." Charlotte stared at William with those impossibly familiar green eyes, trying to process information that seemed impossible to understand. The idea that she had a father, that she wasn't truly an orphan, that this wealthy stranger was somehow connected to her in the most fundamental way imaginable, was too enormous for her 7-year-old mind to fully grasp. "My father?" Charlotte repeated slowly, looking between William and Ruth with growing confusion. "But Grandma Ruth, you told me my daddy died in the same car accident as my mama." William knelt down so that he was at Charlotte's eye level, his heart breaking at the innocent question. "Charlotte, I need to tell you something that's going to be very confusing and maybe a little scary. I thought you had died too. For 7 years I believed that both you and your mother were gone. I didn't know you were alive and growing up to be such a wonderful little girl." "But how is that possible?" Charlotte asked, her natural intelligence immediately grasping the central problem with this revelation. "If you're my daddy, why didn't you come find me? Why did Grandma Ruth have to take care of me all by herself?" Ruth stepped forward, knowing that she owed Charlotte an explanation for the choice that had shaped her entire life. "Sweetheart, when you were born, there was a terrible confusion at the hospital. Your daddy was told that you had died along with your mama, and when I found out you were alive, I was scared that if I told him, he might take you away from me. I made a decision to keep it secret, and I know now that it was wrong." Charlotte looked at William with the careful assessment of a child who had learned not to trust promises that seemed too good to be true. "Are you really my daddy? How can I know for sure?" William felt tears gathering in his eyes at his daughter's practical caution. "Charlotte, your full name is Charlotte Elizabeth Wilson. You were born on October 28th at Children's Memorial Hospital. Your mother's name was Sarah Mitchell, and she was a pediatric nurse who loved helping children. She had green eyes just like yours, and she had a dimple in her left cheek that appears when she smiled, just like the one you have." As Charlotte unconsciously touched her left cheek, William continued, "Your mother and I chose your name very carefully. Charlotte was your mother's grandmother's name, and Elizabeth was my grandmother's name. We wanted you to carry both of our family histories with you. The specific details, combined with the obvious emotion in William's voice, began to convince Charlotte that this man was telling the truth. But acceptance of the facts didn't immediately erase 7 years of believing herself to be alone in the world. "If you're really my daddy," Charlotte said, her voice small but determined, "then why do I have to live in our tiny apartment and worry about Grandma Ruth's medicine money? Why do kids at school make fun of me for being different? Why couldn't I get the special physical therapy that Dr. Martinez said would help my legs?" Each question hit William like a physical blow, reminding him of how much his daughter had struggled while he possessed the resources to give her everything she needed. 7 years of unnecessary hardship, all because of a tragic misunderstanding, and one woman's misguided attempt to protect the child she loved. "Charlotte," William said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for all those years when I couldn't take care of you. You're never going to have to worry about money or medicine or medical care ever again. And anyone who's mean to you is going to have to deal with me." Before Charlotte could respond, the office door opened and Ben Torres burst in, followed closely by his mother, Maria, who had received his frantic phone call asking her to bring him to the school immediately. "Charlotte," Ben called out, his young face bright with excitement and curiosity. "Did Mr. Harrison find you? Is he really your daddy?" Charlotte looked at her friend with relief and gratitude. Despite the overwhelming nature of what she was learning, Ben's presence made her feel more secure and grounded. "Ben, this is all so confusing. This man says he's my father, but I don't understand how that's possible." William stood up and extended his hand to Ben with deep respect and gratitude. "Ben, I owe you more than I can ever repay. Because of your courage and kindness, I've been able to find my daughter who I thought I had lost forever." Ben beamed with pride, but his primary concern remained focused on Charlotte's well-being. "Mr. Harrison, are you going to be able to help Charlotte with her medical stuff? And are you going to make sure kids stop being mean to her at school?" "Ben," William said solemnly, "Charlotte is going to have the best medical care in the world, and she's going to attend a school where every child is taught to treat others with respect and kindness. More than that, she's going to grow up knowing that she's loved and valued and that she has a father who will protect her no matter what." Maria Torres, who had been quietly observing this extraordinary reunion, stepped forward to address William directly. "Senor Harrison, Ben told me about the phone call he made. I hope he was not wrong to contact you. We are simple people, but we know right from wrong, and we could see that Charlotte needed help." William turned to Maria with profound gratitude. "Mrs. Torres, your son has given me the greatest gift anyone could ever give. He reunited me with my daughter when I thought she was lost forever. Your family will always be part of our family if you'll allow it." As the adult spoke, Charlotte found herself studying William carefully, looking for signs of resemblance and evidence that this extraordinary claim might be true. She could see something familiar in the shape of his jaw and the way he gestured when he spoke. More importantly, there was something in his eyes when he looked at her, a mixture of wonder, love, and protective fierce that she had never seen before. "Daddy," Charlotte said experimentally, testing out the word she had never been able to use before. "If this is all real, what happens now? Do I have to leave Grandma Ruth? Do I have to go live with strangers?" William's heart nearly stopped at hearing his daughter call him Daddy for the first time. It was a moment he had dreamed about for years, without knowing it was possible, and the reality was more overwhelming than any fantasy could have prepared him for. "Charlotte," William said gently, "you're never going to have to leave anyone you love. Grandma Ruth is part of our family, and she always will be. We're going to figure out how to build a life together, all of us. You'll have your own room in a big house with all the books you could ever want to read. But Grandma Ruth will be there too, and Ben and his mother will be welcome any time they want to visit." Ruth Wilson, who had been silently crying throughout this conversation, finally found her voice. "William, I don't deserve your kindness after what I kept from you. But Charlotte loves me and I love her more than my own life. If you're willing to let me stay in her life, I promise I'll never keep any secrets from you again." William looked at the elderly woman who had raised his daughter with such obvious love and dedication. His anger at her deception was real, but it was tempered by his recognition that her motives had come from fear and protectiveness rather than malice. "Ruth," William said, "Charlotte needs all the people who love her in her life. What happened in the past can't be changed, but we can choose how we move forward from here. You're going to be part of our family, and Charlotte is going to continue having her grandmother's love along with her father's support." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Henderson, the school principal, who had been called by her secretary about the unusual gathering in the main office. She immediately recognized William Harrison from school board meetings and fundraising events. "Mr. Harrison," Mrs. Henderson said carefully, "I understand there's been some kind of family situation discovered here today. As an educator, I need to make sure that Charlotte's best interests are being protected." William appreciated the principal's concern for Charlotte's welfare. "Mrs. Henderson, I completely understand your position. Tomorrow morning I'll be contacting my attorneys to begin the legal process of establishing paternity through DNA testing and arranging for proper custody documentation. I'll also be providing you with all the necessary paperwork to show that I'm Charlotte's biological father and that this reunion is legitimate." Charlotte, who had been listening to this adult conversation with growing anxiety, suddenly spoke up. "Am I going to be in trouble for any of this? Did Ben do something wrong by calling you?" William immediately knelt down beside Charlotte again, recognizing her fear that this miraculous turn of events might somehow result in punishment for her or her friend. "Charlotte, nobody is in trouble. Ben did exactly the right thing by calling me, and you haven't done anything wrong. The only thing that's going to change is that your life is going to get much, much better." "But what about my school?" Charlotte asked. "What about Mrs. Patterson and the few kids who are nice to me? What about Ben? Will I still be able to see him if I change schools?" Ben immediately stepped forward to address his friend's concerns. "Charlotte, even if you go to a different school, we're still going to be best friends forever. And maybe your new school will be so much better that you'll be happier there." William was struck by Ben's mature understanding of the situation and his immediate prioritization of Charlotte's happiness over his own desire to keep his friend close. "Ben, Charlotte will always be able to see you whenever she wants. In fact, I'm hoping that you and your mother will come visit us regularly, and maybe we can arrange for you to attend some of the same activities or programs that Charlotte participates in." As the evening continued and the practical arrangements were discussed, Charlotte began to feel the first real stirrings of hope that her life might truly be about to change for the better. The idea of having a father who wanted to protect and provide for her, of not having to worry about money or medical expenses, of attending a school where children were taught to be kind rather than cruel, seemed almost too wonderful to be real. But most amazing of all was the realization that she was not truly alone in the world. She had a father who had been missing her for her entire life, who looked at her with love and pride, who seemed to understand that her physical challenges didn't define her worth or limit her potential. "Daddy," Charlotte said, the word coming more naturally now, "will you tell me about my mama? I want to know everything about her and about why you loved her." William felt his heart swell with love and grief as he prepared to share with his daughter the story of the remarkable woman who had given her life. "Charlotte, your mother was the most extraordinary person I've ever known, and you have inherited all of her best qualities. She would be so proud of the kind, brave, intelligent young woman you're becoming." As Charlotte leaned against her father for the first time, 7 years of separation began to dissolve in the warmth of recognition that transcended rational understanding. This was her father, the man who had given her life, the parent she had dreamed about during all those lonely nights when she wondered why she was different from other children who had complete families. The abandoned emergency contact list that had started this miraculous day was about to transform 3 lives in ways that none of them could have imagined when Ben first decided that Charlotte Wilson deserved to know her father's love. The process of rebuilding a family that had been separated by tragedy and kept apart by fear proved to be both more complex and more beautiful than any of them had anticipated. In the weeks following that emotional reunion in the school office, William threw himself into the legal and logistical challenges of establishing his paternity and creating a stable home environment for Charlotte with the same intensity he had once devoted to building his business empire. The DNA test results, processed through the most reputable laboratory in the state, confirmed what everyone already knew in their hearts. Charlotte Elizabeth Wilson was indeed the daughter of William Harrison and Sarah Mitchell. The legal documentation that followed was more complicated, requiring careful navigation of custody laws and the involvement of social services to ensure that Charlotte's best interests were protected throughout the transition. Dr. Patricia Yamamoto, the pediatrician who had been on duty the night of Sarah's accident, was brought in to provide testimony about the circumstances that had led to the tragic miscommunication. She explained to the family court judge how the overwhelming trauma caseload that night, combined with the critical nature of Charlotte's premature birth, had resulted in the infant being registered under her mother's maiden name rather than the Harrison name that would have identified her as William's daughter. Ruth Wilson's decision to keep Charlotte's survival secret from William was examined carefully by child welfare specialists and family court officials. After extensive interviews and psychological evaluations, the court determined that Ruth's actions, while misguided, had been motivated by genuine love and fear rather than any intention to harm either William or Charlotte. The judge ruled that Ruth should remain an integral part of Charlotte's life, while William assumed primary custody and responsibility. The most challenging aspect of the transition was helping Charlotte adjust to the enormous changes in her circumstances while maintaining the emotional connections that had sustained her throughout her early childhood. William was determined not to disrupt Charlotte's sense of identity or her bond with Ruth, even as he provided her with opportunities and resources that would transform her daily life. The new living arrangements reflected William's commitment to honoring Charlotte's existing relationships while creating space for their own father-daughter bond to develop. His estate was modified to include a comfortable apartment for Ruth, complete with medical accommodations for her arthritis and close proximity to Charlotte's rooms. The house was also equipped with state-of-the-art accessibility features, including ramps, adjustable furniture, and specialized bathroom fixtures that would allow Charlotte greater independence as she grew. Charlotte's medical care was immediately upgraded to include consultations with the finest pediatric specialist in the country, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a renowned expert in spina bifida treatment, designed a comprehensive therapy program that combined traditional physical therapy with innovative new treatments that showed promise for improving Charlotte's mobility and reducing her pain. The most dramatic change was in Charlotte's educational environment. After extensive research and visits to several private schools, William enrolled Charlotte at Riverside Academy, a prestigious institution known for its inclusive policies and anti-bullying programs. The school's philosophy emphasized character development alongside academic excellence, creating an environment where children learn to value kindness and cooperation over competition and exclusion. Charlotte's first day at Riverside Academy was accompanied by considerable anxiety on everyone's part. She had spent 7 years at Westfield Elementary, where her daily struggles with harassment and social isolation had become a familiar, if painful, routine. The transition to a new school, even one with better policies and resources, represented a leap into unknown territory. William accompanied Charlotte to school that first morning, carrying her backpack and walking slowly beside her as she navigated the campus on her new titanium crutches. The difference in her mobility was already noticeable. The lightweight, properly fitted assistive devices allowed her to move with greater confidence and less fatigue than the old equipment she had used at her previous school. "Remember, sweetheart," William said as they approached the main entrance, "if anyone is unkind to you or makes you feel uncomfortable, you tell your teacher immediately, and then you call me. You never have to face anything like this alone again." Charlotte nodded, though her nervousness was evident in the way she gripped her crutches. "Daddy, what if the kids here think I'm weird too? What if they don't want to be friends with someone who can't run and play like they do?" "Charlotte," William said, stopping to kneel beside her, "anyone who judges you based on your physical differences isn't worthy of your friendship. The right friends will see your intelligence, your kindness, and your courage. And if it takes time to find those friends, that's okay. You're strong enough to wait for the people who deserve to know you." The morning exceeded everyone's expectations. Charlotte's new teacher, Ms. Jennifer Walsh, had been thoroughly briefed on Charlotte's background and needs, and she introduced Charlotte to the class with an emphasis on her academic achievements and her love of reading. Several students immediately expressed interest in sharing books and discussing their favorite authors with Charlotte. During recess, instead of standing alone watching other children play, as had been her routine at Westfield Elementary, Charlotte found herself invited to join a group of students who were working on a puzzle under the shade of a large oak tree. The activity was perfectly suited to her abilities, and her quick problem-solving skills quickly made her a valued member of the group. Most importantly, when one student made an insensitive comment about Charlotte's crutches, several other children immediately spoke up to defend her, and the teacher addressed the situation quickly and effectively. The contrast with her previous school environment was so dramatic that Charlotte called William during lunch to tell him how different everything felt. Meanwhile, Ben Torres continued to play a special role in Charlotte's life, even though they now attended different schools. William had arranged for Ben to spend Saturday afternoons at the estate, where the two children would work on homework together, explore the extensive gardens, and maintain the friendship that had been forged in a school hallway during Charlotte's darkest moment. These Saturday visits also provided an opportunity for William to express his ongoing gratitude to the Torres family. Maria had been offered a position as head of maintenance for Harrison Industries office buildings, a role that came with significantly better pay, benefits, and working conditions than her previous employment. While Maria initially hesitated to accept what she perceived as charity, William convinced her that her skills and work ethic made her genuinely qualified for the position. "Mrs. Torres," William had explained during one of their conversations, "your son gave me back my daughter. That's not something that can ever be repaid, but it is something that should be honored. Giving you better opportunities isn't charity, it's recognition of your family's extraordinary character." The friendship between Charlotte and Ben deepened as they shared the experience of adjusting to new circumstances. Ben was thriving in his mother's increased financial stability, participating in after-school programs and activities that had previously been financially impossible. Charlotte was blossoming in an environment where her intelligence was celebrated and her physical differences were accommodated rather than mocked. During one of their Saturday afternoons together, as they sat in the estate's library working on their respective homework assignments, Charlotte looked up from her advanced reading comprehension workbook to address the question that had been troubling her for weeks. "Ben," she said seriously, "do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't made that phone call? What if you had just decided it wasn't your business to help me?" Ben considered the question with the philosophical depth that had always characterized his approach to moral issues. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember what my mama always taught me. When you see someone who needs help, you help them if you can. It doesn't matter if it's scary or hard or if you don't know what will happen. You just do what's right." "But you were only 6 years old," Charlotte pointed out. "Most kids wouldn't have even thought about calling a grown-up they didn't know. Most kids wouldn't have cared enough to try." "Maybe," Ben agreed. "But you weren't just any kid to me. You were my friend, and friends take care of each other. Besides, I could tell you were special, smart and kind and brave. I knew that if someone important found out about you, they would want to help." The conversation was interrupted by William, who had been listening from the doorway with tears in his eyes. The bond between these two remarkable children continued to amaze him, and he was determined to nurture their friendship for as long as they wanted to maintain it. "Ben," William said, entering the library, "I've been thinking about something, and I wanted to run an idea past you and Charlotte. Next month is Charlotte's 8th birthday, and she's been talking about wanting to do something special to celebrate. What would you think about organizing a party that brings together children from both of your schools?" Charlotte's eyes lit up with excitement at the suggestion. "Really? We could invite kids from Riverside Academy and Westfield Elementary, even kids who don't have many friends of their own." "Especially kids who don't have many friends," William confirmed. "We could make it a celebration not just of your birthday, but of the importance of kindness and inclusion. We could have activities that children with different abilities can all enjoy together, and maybe we could give everyone books or art supplies to take home." Ben nodded enthusiastically. "We could show other kids that being different doesn't make someone less important. And maybe some of the kids from your old school would learn to be nicer to children who need extra help." The party planning became a family project that involved Charlotte, Ben, Ruth, Maria, and William working together to create an event that would reflect their shared values of inclusivity and compassion. Charlotte insisted that Marcus Chen, her former tormentor, be invited along with all the other children from Westfield Elementary. When William questioned the wisdom of including someone who had been cruel to her, Charlotte's response revealed the depth of her emotional growth. "Daddy," she explained, "maybe Marcus is mean to other kids because he's unhappy about something in his own life. Maybe if he sees that I have people who love me now, and that I'm not angry at him, he might learn to be kinder. Besides, this party is supposed to be about giving everyone a chance to feel included and special." The 8th birthday celebration that resulted from their collaborative planning exceeded everyone's expectations. The estate was transformed into a wonderland of games, activities, and entertainment designed to ensure that every child, regardless of their physical abilities or social status, could participate fully in the festivities. William hired professional entertainers who specialized in inclusive programming, ensuring that the magicians, musicians, and storytellers could engage children with a wide range of needs and interests. The activities ranged from art stations where children could create projects to take home, to adaptive sports games that allowed children with different mobility levels to compete on equal terms. Most importantly, the party created opportunities for children from both schools to interact in an environment where kindness and cooperation were explicitly encouraged and modeled by the adults present. Charlotte found herself serving as a bridge between the two groups, introducing her new friends from Riverside Academy to children from Westfield Elementary, who had previously known her only as a target for harassment. The transformation in Marcus Chen was particularly remarkable. Faced with Charlotte's genuine forgiveness and her obvious happiness in her new circumstances, he approached her during the party to offer an apology that seemed to come from genuine remorse rather than adult pressure. "Charlotte," Marcus said awkwardly, "I wanted to say I'm sorry for being mean to you at school. I didn't know about your dad or anything, but that's not an excuse. I was wrong to pick on you, and I'm glad you're happy now." Charlotte's response demonstrated the wisdom and maturity that had developed through her experiences with both adversity and recovery. "Thank you for saying that, Marcus. I forgive you. Maybe we can be friends now, or at least not enemies." As the party wound down and children began to leave with their gift bags and new friendships, William found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all together. A moment of cruelty in a school hallway had become the catalyst for a reunion that had healed years of grief and loss. A 6-year-old boy's phone call had transformed multiple lives and created a new family bound together by love, forgiveness, and shared commitment to helping others. The most remarkable aspect of their story was not the dramatic reunion or the transformation of Charlotte's circumstances, but the way that love and kindness had multiplied throughout their community. Ben's courage had saved Charlotte. Charlotte's forgiveness had redeemed Marcus, and their combined example was inspiring other children to choose compassion over cruelty in their own daily interactions. As Charlotte hugged her friends goodbye and thanked them for celebrating with her, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that terrible day when Marcus had pushed her down in the hallway. She now had a father who loved and protected her, medical care that was improving her mobility, educational opportunities that challenged her intellect, and friendships built on mutual respect and genuine affection. But perhaps most importantly, she had learned that even the darkest moments could become the seeds of something beautiful if people chose to respond with courage, kindness, and hope. 1 year later, Charlotte Harrison stood at the podium in the main auditorium of the newly constructed Children's Hope Center, her voice clear and confident as she addressed an audience of philanthropists, educators, and child advocates who had gathered for the facility's grand opening. At 8 years old, she had become the youngest keynote speaker in the organization's history, but her words carried the wisdom of someone who had personally experienced both the cruelty and the kindness that children could show one another. "When I was 7 years old," Charlotte began, her green eyes scanning the audience with remarkable composure, "I thought I was alone in the world. I had a grandmother who loved me, but I didn't have a father, and I faced bullying at school every day because I used crutches to walk. I felt like nobody understood what it was like to be different, and I sometimes wondered if my life would ever get better." The auditorium was completely silent as Charlotte continued her speech, her small figure commanding attention despite her youth. Behind her, a large screen displayed photographs from the past year, images of Charlotte at her new school, working with physical therapists, reading to younger children, and most prominently, standing beside Ben Torres at various charity events they had participated in together. But then something amazing happened, Charlotte continued. My best friend Ben saw that I needed help and he was brave enough to do something about it. He made a phone call that changed my entire life and reunited me with my father, who I didn't even know was alive. That phone call taught me that one person's courage can transform everything, even when that person is just 6 years old. William Harrison watched from the front row, his heart swelling with pride as he listened to his daughter speak about their journey with such eloquence and insight. Beside him sat Ruth Wilson, whose health had improved dramatically with access to better medical care, and Maria Torres, whose son Ben was beaming with pride from his seat in the second row. The Children's Hope Center represented the culmination of William's commitment to honoring Charlotte's experience by creating resources for other children facing similar challenges. The facility combined educational support, medical services, and social programs designed to help children with disabilities achieve their full potential while building communities of inclusion and understanding. The Charlotte Harrison Initiative, Charlotte continued, isn't just named after me. It's named after every child who has ever felt alone or different or scared. It's for kids who need medical help they can't afford, and kids who face bullying because they're not like everyone else, and kids who dream of having someone believe in them and support their goals. The initiative had grown far beyond William's original vision, expanding to include programs in 12 states and serving thousands of children annually. The work was funded not only by Harrison Industries but by donations from individuals and corporations inspired by Charlotte and Ben's story, which had been featured in national media and had sparked conversations about childhood resilience and the power of peer advocacy. Ben Torres, now 7 years old and thriving in his new school environment, had become Charlotte's partner in many of the foundation's outreach efforts. Together, they visited schools to talk about inclusion and kindness, participated in awareness campaigns for children with disabilities, and served as junior ambassadors for anti-bullying programs across the region. My friend Ben taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Charlotte said, looking directly at Ben and smiling. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared, because helping someone else is more important than protecting yourself from getting in trouble or being embarrassed. The audience erupted in applause as Ben stood up and waved, his face glowing with happiness and pride. The friendship between Charlotte and Ben had become a symbol of the Foundation's core message, that children had the power to change the world through simple acts of courage and compassion. After Charlotte's speech, the audience was invited to tour the facility and see the various programs in action. The center housed a state-of-the-art physical therapy clinic where children could receive treatment regardless of their family's ability to pay, an adaptive technology lab that helped children with disabilities access educational resources, and a library specifically designed for children with various reading challenges and learning differences. Most innovative was the peer advocacy program, inspired directly by Ben's intervention on Charlotte's behalf. The program trained children to recognize signs of bullying, social isolation, and emotional distress in their peers, and provided them with appropriate resources and adult contacts to ensure that no child had to face serious problems alone. The research shows that children are often more willing to confide in other children than in adults, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the center's director of social services, as she led a tour group through the facility. By empowering young people to be advocates for their peers, we create multiple safety nets and ensure that fewer children fall through the cracks. The program had already shown remarkable success in the pilot schools where it had been implemented. Reports of bullying incidents had decreased significantly, not because the problems were being hidden, but because children were intervening early and connecting struggling peers with appropriate help before situations escalated to crisis levels. Ruth Wilson, who had become one of the center's most dedicated volunteers, served as a mentor for grandparents and elderly caregivers who were raising children with disabilities. Her own experience navigating the challenges of providing care on a limited income made her uniquely qualified to help other families access resources and advocate for their children's needs. I made mistakes, Ruth would tell the families she worked with, but I learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of love. These children deserve every opportunity we can give them, and that sometimes means swallowing our pride and accepting support from people who want to help. Maria Torres had become the center's facilities manager, overseeing the maintenance and operations of the building, while also serving as a liaison to the Spanish-speaking families who utilize the center's services. Her bilingual abilities and her personal experience as an immigrant parent made her an invaluable bridge between the center's resources and families who might otherwise struggle to access them. The success of the Children's Hope Center had attracted national attention, leading to speaking engagements and media appearances for both William and Charlotte. They had appeared together on several major talk shows, where Charlotte's articulate descriptions of her experiences and her clear vision for helping other children had impressed audiences across the country. People sometimes ask me if I'm angry about the years when I didn't know my father was alive, Charlotte had said during one particularly memorable television interview. But I think everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. If I hadn't experienced being poor and being bullied and feeling alone, I wouldn't understand how to help other kids who are going through the same things. My difficult years taught me compassion, and my happy years gave me the resources to do something with that compassion. The interview had gone viral on social media, with Charlotte's mature perspective and articulate speaking style earning praise from educators, child advocates, and families around the world. More importantly, it had generated millions of dollars in donations for the Children's Hope Initiative and had inspired similar programs in communities across the globe. As the grand opening celebration continued into the evening, Charlotte found herself surrounded by children who had benefited from the center's programs. There was 8-year-old Maria, whose spina bifida was similar to Charlotte's but who now received state-of-the-art physical therapy that was improving her mobility dramatically. There was 10-year-old David, whose autism had made him a target for bullying until the peer advocacy program connected him with understanding classmates who appreciated his unique talents. Most moving was the presence of several children from Westfield Elementary, including Marcus Chen, who had become one of the most effective peer advocates in his school. Marcus's transformation from bully to protector had been gradual but genuine, inspired partly by Charlotte's forgiveness and partly by his participation in the center's character development programs. "Charlotte," Marcus said as the evening wound down, "I wanted to thank you for not giving up on me. When you invited me to your birthday party last year, even after how mean I had been to you, it made me realize that I wanted to be the kind of person who helps people instead of hurting them." Charlotte smiled at her former tormentor, who had become an unexpected ally in their shared mission of creating more inclusive school environments. "Marcus, we all make mistakes when we're young. What matters is that we learn from them and try to do better. You've helped so many kids this year by standing up to bullies and including kids who feel left out." As the last guests departed and the family prepared to head home, William reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The grand opening of the Children's Hope Center represented not just the achievement of his philanthropic goals, but the fulfillment of a promise he had made to Charlotte and to himself, that her suffering would not be meaningless, and that other children would benefit from the lessons learned through their family's experience. Charlotte had grown remarkably over the past year, not just physically but emotionally and intellectually. Her confidence had blossomed in the supportive environment of Riverside Academy, where her academic gifts were challenged and nurtured. Her physical condition had improved significantly with proper medical care, and while she still used crutches for mobility, her strength and endurance had increased to the point where she could participate in many activities that had previously been impossible. Most importantly, Charlotte had developed a sense of purpose that went far beyond her personal circumstances. She understood that her story had the power to inspire and help others, and she embraced that responsibility with remarkable maturity and grace. "Daddy," Charlotte said as they settled into the car for the drive home, "do you think Mama would be proud of what we've built together?" William felt tears gathering in his eyes as he thought about Sarah and the values she had embodied throughout her too short life. "Charlotte, your mother dedicated her career to helping children who were facing medical challenges and difficult circumstances. The work we're doing through the foundation is exactly the kind of legacy she would have wanted to leave. She would be incredibly proud of the woman you're becoming and the difference you're making in other children's lives." Ben, who was riding home with them after the evening's celebration, added his own perspective with characteristic wisdom. "I think your mama is probably watching over all of us, making sure we remember to help other kids the way she helped kids when she was alive." As they drove through the city streets toward home, Charlotte gazed out the window at the lights twinkling in the darkness. Each light represented a family, a story, a child who might be struggling with challenges similar to those she had faced. The thought no longer made her sad, because she now knew that there were resources available to help, advocates ready to intervene, and a growing network of children and adults committed to ensuring that no child faced serious problems alone. The little girl who had once been mocked and pushed down in a school hallway had become a powerful voice for inclusion and compassion. The 6-year-old boy who had made a courageous phone call had become a symbol of peer advocacy and childhood heroism. Together, they had helped create a movement that was transforming how schools, communities, and families approached the challenges facing children with disabilities and differences. Their story had begun with tragedy and loss, continued through years of struggle and separation, and transformed into something beautiful through the power of love, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief that every child deserved protection, support, and the opportunity to reach their full potential. As Charlotte drifted off to sleep in the back seat of the car, her head resting against Ben's shoulder while they both held copies of the books they planned to read to younger children the following week, William felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected ways that life could heal and transform even the deepest wounds. The abandoned emergency contact list that had started their journey was now framed in Charlotte's bedroom, a reminder that sometimes the most important connections in life came through the most unlikely circumstances. But more than that, it served as a symbol of hope, proof that even when things seemed impossible, courage and kindness could create miracles that changed not just individual lives, but entire communities. Their family had been broken by tragedy and rebuilt through love, but their story was really just beginning. With each child they helped, each school they visited, each life they touched through their advocacy work, Charlotte and Ben were proving that the most powerful force in the world was the decision to care about someone else's well-being more than your own comfort or safety. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities for service, growth, and the continuation of a legacy that honored both Sarah's memory and the countless children who would benefit from the courage of two young people who refused to accept that suffering had to be meaningless or that differences had to divide us from one another.